Cleopatra's Lost Tomb, the final mystery of Egypt's last queen. Imagine one of history's most famous queens. Not a myth, not a storybook character, but a real woman who controlled empires, spoke many languages, and stood toe-to-toe with the might of Rome. That woman was Cleopatra VII, the last queen of ancient Egypt. She ruled for nearly 3 decades and shaped the fate of nations. But here's a sharp twist: we still do not know where she was buried. In all of Egypt, with its great pyramids and royal tombs, Cleopatra's final resting place remains one of history's greatest puzzles. Picture the world she lived in. Ancient Egypt was at its richest and most powerful. A city called Alexandria, built on the edge of the Mediterranean where statues towered, scholars debated ideas, and the royal palace was a seat of influence. We have stone, papyrus, coins, and poems that tell us her story, yet nothing clearly marks her grave. History tells us she ruled until 30 BC and that she died in the months after her lover Mark Antony was defeated by Rome. Ancient writers said she was laid to rest beside him in a grand tomb near a temple of Isis. But centuries have passed, and that resting place has never been found. So here is the big question, the one scholars, explorers, and all of us still ask. Why have we never found Cleopatra's final resting place? If she was buried beside her lover, if writers described a tomb, and if Egypt preserved the graves of earlier pharaohs, why is her tomb missing from the earth? Today, archaeologists are following clues like detectives. They scan seafloors, explore tunnels beneath ancient ruins, and dig in forgotten temples. Some believe that what we are really looking for could be underwater, hidden by earthquakes or by centuries of sea level change. Still others think it may lie in an old temple site that few people expected to hold a royal burial. This is not just history, it is a real mystery, one that has stood unanswered for more than 2,000 years. Who is Cleopatra? To understand why Cleopatra's lost tomb matters, we need to first understand the woman herself. Cleopatra VII was not just any ruler, she was the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt. She came to power in a time when Egypt was still rich and important, but also caught in the growing shadow of Rome. Her full name was Cleopatra VII Theophilopator, and she belonged to a long line of Macedonian Greek rulers who had ruled Egypt ever since the great army of Alexander the Great conquered the land. In 51 BC, when she was just about 18 years old, Cleopatra became Queen of Egypt. At first, she shared the throne with her younger brother Ptolemy XIII. Power struggles soon followed, and Cleopatra had to fight not only for her kingdom but to keep her place as its ruler. Cleopatra was well-educated and politically smart. Unlike many rulers who used beauty alone to influence others, she spoke multiple languages, including Egyptian, which set her apart from many of her predecessors. But despite her intelligence and strength, Cleopatra knew that Egypt's future depended on alliances with Rome, the rising power in the Mediterranean world. Her first major Roman alliance was with Julius Caesar, one of Rome's most powerful leaders. Caesar helped her defeat her brother in a civil war, and together they formed both a political and personal connection. From this union came a child known to history as Caesarion. Even after Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, Cleopatra didn't fade from the world stage. Instead, she formed a new partnership, this time with another powerful Roman general, Mark Antony. Their alliance was as much about power as it was about affection. Together, they tried to protect Egypt's independence and build a future that could rival the power of Rome. But the political world they lived in was unstable. Rome was no longer ruled by a single leader like Caesar. Instead, Antony shared power with Octavian, who was Caesar's adopted heir. Tensions between Antony and Octavian grew until they finally clashed in a great naval battle at Actium in 31 BC, and they lost. That loss changed everything. Antony, believing Cleopatra had already died, took his own life. Cleopatra, now facing defeat and captivity, chose her own end rather than be paraded through Roman streets as a conquered queen. Ancient writers say she took poison. She died in 30 BC, bringing to an end not only her life but also the long line of Egyptian pharaohs. With her death, Egypt became part of the Roman Empire. She remains one of history's most studied and misunderstood figures, not just because of her relationships with Rome's greatest leaders, but because she was herself a ruler, strategist, and survivor in a world dominated by empires. Alexandria, city of kings and queens. To understand the mystery of Cleopatra's lost tomb, we need to picture the world she lived in. At the heart of her empire was Alexandria, a city built by Alexander the Great that became Egypt's capital and one of the most important places in the ancient world. Alexandria was where Cleopatra lived, ruled, and watched the fate of her kingdom unfold. It was a place of grand palaces, busy harbors, wide streets, and great learning, home to the famous Library of Alexandria and the towering lighthouse of Pharos, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. People came from across the Mediterranean to trade, study, and worship in this great capital. But here, where the story takes a twist that matters deeply to the mystery of the tomb. Today, when we walk along the modern Corniche or visit the ruins of Pompey's Pillar, we're seeing just a small part of ancient Alexandria. Much of the city, including parts of the royal quarter, no longer sits on dry land. Over many centuries, powerful natural forces shifted the coastline, and large sections of ancient Alexandria slid into the Mediterranean Sea or were buried beneath shifting sands. One of the most dramatic moments in this story happened in AD 365. On July 21 of that year, a huge undersea earthquake near Crete triggered a massive tsunami that hit Alexandria. Ancient accounts describe the sea suddenly pulling back from the shore, exposing the ocean floor, and then rushing back with enormous force, flooding the city, destroying buildings, and killing many people. That event was devastating, but it was not the only change the city faced. Over the next centuries, earthquakes continued, the land slowly sank, and the sea gradually advanced. What once was land, including harbors, temples, docks, and possibly the royal palace, ended up underwater. Archaeologists have now mapped parts of this old city beneath the sea, including foundations of wharves, storehouses, and temple remains, now buried under sand and sediment. Underwater work by French archaeologist Frank Gaudiot and his team has revealed that entire sections of Alexandria's port and public buildings lie preserved beneath the waves. These discoveries show how much of the ancient city simply no longer looks like it did in Cleopatra's time. In some areas, the remains are now 5 to 8 meters below the modern sea level. This history of sinking and shifting land is why the usual idea that Cleopatra's tomb should be near her palace becomes a big challenge. If the tomb was originally planned close to the royal complex in Alexandria, it might now be underwater or destroyed or buried deep beneath layers of sand and mud. Some scholars even argue that the palace itself now lies under the Mediterranean, and if the tomb was attached to or near that palace, it could be there too, just out of reach and still waiting to be found under the waves. So when you imagine Alexandria in Cleopatra's time, think of a thriving capital, and then imagine time and nature quietly reclaiming much of it, hiding treasures and tombs alike beneath the sea. That is why the traditional location for Cleopatra's burial, once thought obvious, is suddenly very hard to search today. Cleopatra's city was built for greatness, but the same sea that brought trade, wealth, and connection to the world also became a barrier, making it difficult for modern archaeologists to uncover the final chapter of Egypt's last queen. The Temple of Isis theory. If you asked most historians where Cleopatra's tomb might be, many would still point toward Alexandria. But over the past 20 years, one site far from the city's center has captured the attention of archaeologists hunting this ancient mystery. A temple complex called Taposiris Magna, located about 30 miles west of Alexandria in the coastal town of Borg el Arab. Taposiris Magna wasn't just any old ruin. In ancient times, it was a significant religious center dedicated to the Egyptian gods, especially Osiris and Isis. These gods were central figures in Egyptian beliefs about death and the afterlife. Isis, in particular, was a mother goddess connected to healing, protection, and eternal life. Cleopatra herself often linked her image with Isis during her lifetime, appearing in art and ceremonies in the goddess's iconic style. Though when archaeologist Kathleen Martínez began her search for Cleopatra's tomb in the early 2000s, she didn't start at the obvious palace ruins in Alexandria. Instead, she looked at ancient sources describing the queen's strong spiritual identity with Isis and used them to guide her. Martínez reasoned that if Cleopatra truly saw herself as a living embodiment of the goddess, as many ancient accounts suggest, then a temple tied to Isis might be the right place to look for her burial. At Taposiris Magna, Martínez and her team found more than just old walls and columns. They uncovered a large cemetery of Greco-Roman era burials, deep underground shafts and pottery, coins and other artifacts dating to Cleopatra's time. Some of the bronze coins even bear her image or date to her reign. These finds suggest the site was active and significant during the period when Cleopatra lived and died. But the discoveries didn't stop on dry land. Offshore exploration teams, including the famed ocean explorer Bob Ballard, mapped what appears to be a sunken ancient port connected to the temple. This port, buried beneath centuries of sediment, may have been part of the ancient shoreline during Cleopatra's era. The presence of this harbor is important because it suggests that the area around Taposiris Magna was a thriving center of activity, not just a remote religious outpost. Martínez believes this combination of temple, cemetery, and port creates a compelling picture. Cleopatra and Mark Antony could have been brought here after their deaths and laid to rest in a sacred location connected to Isis, away from the crowded political heart of Alexandria. In her view, the site's religious importance would have made it a fitting final resting place for Egypt's last queen. That said, it's important to be clear, no direct evidence like a tomb with an inscription naming Cleopatra has been found yet. Many scholars are intrigued by the Taposiris Magna theory, but others remain skeptical, pointing out that coins and artifacts can travel and that the site's connection to Cleopatra's burial remains unproven. Still, Taposiris Magna stands as one of the leading modern theories about where Cleopatra might be buried. Its combination of religious significance, archaeological finds, and even a connecting underwater port makes it one of the most fascinating places in the ongoing search for the lost tomb. And that's exactly why today's hunt for Cleopatra's final resting place continues here, with each season of digging bringing new clues, new puzzles, and new hope. Archaeological work at Taposiris Magna. When most people think of archaeologists, they imagine dusty hats and brushes gently uncovering pottery. But the work at Taposiris Magna feels more like a detective story, clues, long odds, and a team following every lead they can find. At the heart of this work is Dr. Kathleen Martínez, a woman who didn't start her career in archaeology at all. She was trained as a lawyer, and it wasn't until later in life that she devoted herself to searching for Cleopatra's lost tomb. Driven by curiosity and a deep study of ancient texts, Martínez began excavating at Taposiris Magna in 2005, convinced it might be the long-lost burial place of Egypt's last queen. Martínez and her team have been digging, mapping, and exploring the temple grounds for nearly 2 decades now. What they've found is not the tomb itself, not yet, at least, but a series of discoveries that build a fascinating picture of life, death, and ritual at this site during Cleopatra's era. One of the most talked about finds has been the hundreds of bronze coins scattered around the temple complex. Many of these coins bear the image of Cleopatra VII, and they turn up in places like the temple courtyard, the entrance, and even in what Martínez calls a sacred trench, a hidden area that may have been used for offerings or ritual purposes. These coins are important not because they prove Cleopatra was buried here, they don't, but because they tie the site to her time and show how strongly her presence was felt here. In ancient Egypt, coins were often used as votive offerings or symbols, and hundreds of them bearing her face suggest that people at Taposiris Magna cared about her legacy in some form. The team hasn't just found coins, they've also uncovered a cemetery of burials and mummies from the late Ptolemaic period, the era when Cleopatra ruled. Some of these burials are elaborate with gilded decorations and objects that point to elite status. These are not ordinary graves, and that tells archaeologists that Taposiris Magna was more than a simple temple. It was a place where powerful people were honored in death. But perhaps the most cinematic discovery so far is the long underground tunnel that runs beneath the temple complex. In 2022, Martínez's team announced they had uncovered a tunnel more than 4,000 feet long, plunging deep toward the ancient coastline and even partially under the Mediterranean Sea. Parts of this tunnel are submerged, and inside it the team found ceramic jars, pottery, and other material dated to the time of Cleopatra. This tunnel adds a level of mystery. Was it a ritual passage used in ancient funerary customs? Or could it point toward yet-to-be-explored chambers that might house the tomb? We simply don't know. What it does do is show how complex and significant the site was, a place that connected land, religion, and sea in ways that are only now becoming clear. Here's the key thing to understand: none of these finds is the tomb itself. There's no sealed burial chamber labeled Cleopatra. No inscription says, "Here lies the queen." What we have so far are clues, coins that tie the site to her reign, elite burials that show the temple was important to powerful people, and a tunnel that hints at hidden spaces yet to be fully explored. But for archaeologists like Martínez, that's exactly how great discoveries start, not with the final answer, but with a pattern of small, intriguing pieces that eventually lead to something much bigger. So the search continues. The team returns season after season, brushing away dirt, mapping tunnels, and following every thread that might lead to the lost tomb of Egypt's last queen. And while no definitive evidence has been found yet, each new artifact gives them, and us, reason to keep looking. The sunken port discovery. So far in this hunt for Cleopatra's lost tomb, most of the action has been on dry land, deep tunnels, broken coins, and ancient ruins. But then came a discovery that literally took the search under the sea. Archaeologists working near the temple of Taposiris Magna, about 30 miles west of Alexandria, made a big breakthrough. They found what appears to be a long-lost ancient port, now submerged beneath the waters of the Mediterranean Sea. This wasn't just a few scattered stones. It was a series of man-made structures under the water, including polished stone floors, cemented blocks, towering columns, anchors, and amphorae, the large storage jars used in ancient shipping. These remains date back to Cleopatra's era and suggest that this area was once a bustling harbor. What makes this more exciting is how the underwater port connects to the archaeological work on land. In 2022, the same team, led by Dr. Kathleen Martínez, uncovered a long underground tunnel stretching out from the temple of Taposiris Magna toward the coast. Inside that tunnel, they found pottery, ceramic jars, and other objects dated to the Ptolemaic period, the time when Cleopatra ruled. Now imagine this: if that tunnel really did lead to a port, then that port may not just be part of ancient trade routes. It could hold clues to how Cleopatra's body might have been brought from the sea to her burial site. Martínez believes that if Cleopatra's tomb was not in Alexandria, but instead at Taposiris Magna, the port could be the very place where her remains arrived in secret after her death. From there, her body could have been transported through that underground passage to a final resting place close to the temple, hidden, protected, and far from Roman eyes. To uncover this submerged port, Martínez brought in help from marine archaeologists and deep-sea experts, including sonar mapping and underwater exploration. What they found under the waves were large, clearly man-made structures, all consistent with an ancient harbor that was once connected to the land. The shoreline during Cleopatra's time was much farther inland than it is today, so what is now underwater would have been dry land and an active harbor back then. And this isn't some minor clue. The scale of the discovery, columns standing more than 6 meters high. Polished stone surfaces, ceramic storage jars, and anchors shows that this was a major maritime hub in the ancient world, active during Cleopatra's time and possibly even earlier. Of course, a sunken port isn't a tomb. Finding ancient docks doesn't prove Cleopatra is buried nearby. There's still no direct evidence, such as inscriptions bearing her name or a sealed burial chamber. But this underwater discovery does something important. It turns our understanding of the hunt sideways and downward. What was once thought to be strictly a land-based mystery now reaches into the sea. It means archaeologists are not just digging in dusty soil, they're diving deep, mapping the seabed, and following tunnels that might connect the world above water with the world beneath it. The sunken port discovery adds a new layer to the mystery and fuels the idea that Cleopatra's final journey from life to death might have begun not just in a temple or palace, but through the sea itself. This is where history and geography meet in a way few people would have imagined. An ancient harbor lost to time, waiting under the Mediterranean, possibly holding clues to one of history's greatest unanswered questions. Why some experts still doubt. Even with all the excitement around Taposiris Magna, The coins, the underground tunnels, the submerged port, not everyone believes this temple site will lead us to Cleopatra's tomb. Some Egyptologists and historians remain cautious, and their skepticism isn't about drama or disbelief for its own sake. It comes from a simple scientific principle. Extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence, and so far that level of evidence doesn't exist yet. Experts who study ancient Egypt closely point out that although archaeologists have found many intriguing clues at Taposiris Magna, no confirmed tomb of Cleopatra or Mark Antony has been uncovered there. There is no sealed chamber, no inscription naming her, and no burial goods directly tied to her life and death. In fact, after more than a decade of digging, many archaeologists still say the evidence linking Cleopatra's tomb to Taposiris Magna is slim. One critic, Zahi Hawass, a former Egyptian minister of antiquities and one of the world's best-known Egyptologists, has worked at Taposiris Magna in the past. According to Hawass, despite years of collaboration, no archaeological evidence has been found that clearly identifies Cleopatra and Antony's burial at the site. In his view, the temple excavations have not yet produced the kind of proof needed to say the tomb is there. Beyond the lack of direct proof, some scholars question whether Taposiris Magna would have been the natural place for Cleopatra's mausoleum in the first place. Ancient texts suggest her burial was beside her palace in Alexandria, a city that was her political heart and where most Ptolemaic rulers were traditionally buried. If that account is accurate, the tomb may still lie somewhere in Alexandria, possibly in places that are now underwater because of centuries of coastal erosion and earthquakes. Experts also note that the burials found so far at Taposiris Magna appear to belong mainly to religious figures or local elites, rather than royalty. That makes it harder to argue convincingly that the site was chosen specifically as the final resting place of a queen. While the presence of Cleopatra-era artifacts shows the site was active during her lifetime, that activity doesn't necessarily mean she was buried there. Another reason for the ongoing debate is that ancient sources are not clear or unanimous about where her tomb should be. Authors like Plutarch recorded that Cleopatra and Mark Antony were buried together, but these accounts don't give an exact location that can be pinpointed today. This leaves room for more than one interpretation and more than one potential location. So the caution from the academic world isn't about dismissing Martinez's work or the discoveries at Taposiris Magna. It's about the limits of the evidence so far and the fact that in archaeology you need something tangible, such as inscribed burial chambers or unmistakable royal tomb architecture, before you can claim a major find. That's a slow, careful process that prioritizes proof over headline-making announcements. In science and archaeology, debate is normal and healthy. It's what pushes researchers to dig deeper, test assumptions, and keep looking until the facts, not just the theories, are on the table. In the case of Cleopatra's tomb, that debate continues and most experts agree on one thing: the mystery has not yet been solved. What finding the tomb would mean. If Cleopatra's tomb is ever found, it wouldn't just be an exciting moment in archaeology, it would be one of the most extraordinary discoveries of our time. Think about it, we found great tombs like King Tutankhamun in Egypt's Valley of the Kings, but we already knew where Tutankhamun was buried. With Cleopatra's burial, we don't even know the location, and that's what makes it such a powerful missing piece in history. The discovery could reshape the story of the ancient world. First, finding her tomb would give us solid physical evidence about how Cleopatra died and how she was buried. Ancient writers give different accounts of her final moments and funeral, but written stories alone aren't enough. A real burial site could contain her remains, objects placed with her, or even inscriptions that explain what happened after her death. That would answer questions historians have debated for centuries, and give us much clearer insight into her final chapter. Second, the tomb could teach us more about the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty, the Greek-Macedonian royal line that ruled Egypt for 3 centuries. Cleopatra was its final ruler, and when she died in 30 BC, Egypt became a province of Rome. Yet we know surprisingly little about how those last days unfolded on the ground, or how the transition affected Egyptian royal rituals. Her tomb could contain clues about how Ptolemaic traditions blended with Egyptian practices at the very end of pharaonic history. Third, it could give fresh evidence about the relationship between Egypt and Rome. Cleopatra didn't rule in isolation. Her life was deeply intertwined with the greatest Roman leaders of her time, especially Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Artifacts, inscriptions, or burial objects from her tomb might show how she wanted to be remembered by Egyptians and Romans alike. perhaps reflecting her political alliances or her own vision of power. Discoveries like this could fill gaps in the historical record and help historians see her legacy more clearly. Beyond the historical facts, there's a human side to the discovery too. Cleopatra's life has been told and retold for thousands of years, through ancient historians, Roman propaganda, art, and modern films. But most of what people think they know about her comes from sources written after her death, often by her enemies or by storytellers. If we found her tomb, we would finally see something that belonged to her in life, an unfiltered material connection to the woman herself. That kind of discovery makes history feel alive, like a real person is finally stepping out of the shadows. Finally, on a broader level, discovering Cleopatra's tomb would connect us directly to a figure who still matters today. She isn't just an ancient queen, she's a symbol of leadership, resistance, and cultural complexity. Seeing her burial place and learning what's inside would remind us that the ancient world wasn't distant or strange, but a world of real people with real challenges, hopes, and stories. It would bring Cleopatra back into the light of history, not as a myth or a Hollywood character, but as a historical figure we can understand in a deeper, more personal way. In short, finding Cleopatra's tomb would be more than an archaeological headline. It would be a bridge between past and present, giving us a clearer picture of a queen whose life and legacy have fascinated the world for more than 2,000 years. The ongoing search. Even after decades of digging and exploration, the hunt for Cleopatra's lost tomb is far from over. This isn't a story that was solved overnight or wrapped up with one big discovery. Instead, it's an ongoing effort shaped by new tools, new technologies, and fresh seasons of fieldwork, all focused on one of history's greatest mysteries. For archaeologists working at Taposiris Magna and other possible sites, the work involves more than just digging with shovels. In many places around the temple and beneath the sea, researchers are using underwater scanning to map what lies hidden beneath the waves. Specialized sonar equipment and multibeam scanners let teams create detailed images of the sea floor, essentially X-ray vision for the ocean. This lets them see submerged structures, columns, and walls that may have once been part of ancient Alexandria's coastline or a port connected to Taposiris Magna itself. On land, teams are turning to ground-penetrating radar, GPR, and other geophysical methods to see what's below the surface without digging straight away. GPR sends radar pulses deep into the ground. When those waves bounce back, they reveal anomalies, empty spaces, walls, or tunnels that might be hidden underground. In searches at Taposiris Magna and nearby possible sites, GPR has shown networks of subsurface cavities and possible corridors that might be connected to unexplored chambers or tomb entrances. These methods are joined by traditional excavation, the slow, careful work of uncovering artifacts and structures layer by layer. Even with advanced scanning and radar, there's no substitute for archaeologists on the ground, brushing soil from pottery shards, identifying coins, documenting mummies, and recording every find with precision. But here's one of the realities of archaeology. It is slow by design. Sites cannot be rushed. Each season brings new work, new analysis, and often new questions rather than quick answers. Excavation seasons, especially in places like Egypt, are limited by climate and logistics. Teams typically work in cooler months when conditions are safer and more productive, and each season's discoveries build on the last. As excavation teams have noted, the work at Taposiris Magna and beneath the seabed is just the beginning of this huge task, not the end. Even as this documentary is being made, researchers are planning new dives, scanning new areas, and reviewing old data with fresh eyes. They are refining their maps, adjusting hypotheses, and training new specialists in underwater archaeology, geophysics, and artifact conservation. In some ways, the search has expanded beyond a single site. It's now a multi-layered investigation that spans coastlines, seabeds, tunnels, and temple ruins. It's important to remember why this search is still alive after more than 2,000 years. We still don't have a confirmed tomb. The clues, the tunnels, the underwater structures, the temple burials, and coins are all pieces of a larger puzzle, but none of them have yet pointed clearly to a burial chamber that can be identified as Cleopatra's final resting place. Because of that, archaeologists keep returning to both land and sea, season after season, bringing better tools and sharper questions to the mystery. This isn't an old story that's been solved already. This is archaeology in motion, slow, meticulous, and full of possibility. And as long as there are unanswered clues and unexplored layers of earth and ocean, the hunt for Cleopatra's lost tomb continues. Final reflection. After everything we've explored, from grand cities that sank beneath the sea, to tunnels carved beneath ancient temples, to sunken ports now hidden deep in the Mediterranean, one fact still remains. Cleopatra's tomb is still lost. More than 2,000 years after her death, we have yet to find the final resting place of Egypt's last great queen. What we do have are clues. Fragments of history dancing just out of reach, artifacts and structures that hint at where she might lie, and the voices of archaeologists who continue to look, season after season. Think about that for a moment. Cleopatra was one of the most powerful figures of her time. She ruled a kingdom, stood against empires, and left a mark on history that still echoes today. Yet the place where she was laid to rest, the place where she should be remembered, remains a mystery. If her tomb is ever found, whether under the sands near Alexandria beneath the waves of the Mediterranean, or hidden somewhere we least expect, it would be more than an archaeological headline. It would be a moment of connection across millennia. The objects, inscriptions, burial practices, and even her remains could tell us things we've only guessed at for generations. How she died and was buried, how the Ptolemaic dynasty ended, and how Egypt's legacy met Rome's rise. But beyond the history books, there is something deeper here. Cleopatra's story still resonates with us today because she was not just a ruler of her time. She has become a symbol of power, struggle, identity, and how history remembers people long after their voices have faded. Her life and the mystery of her tomb remind us that the past isn't a closed book. It's something we're still trying to read. So we end where we began, with a question: will we ever know where Cleopatra is buried?